It is the 4th of the 11th, 2025. The time is 7 minutes past 8, and that means one thing and one thing only, that there are a multitude of F1 centric threads at which we will no need to pull Sir John, Space Ghost, TWM. It's going to get techier than techie things. We'll talk about Stella. And again, this is the Tuesday show, Talk It Tuesday, where we go long and diatribe for all of the relative F1 narrative and thread plots. We'll talk about Stella. We'll talk about McLaren and their advantage. How did they come from last on the grid to all of a sudden market leading purple set to god tier level machinery? We'll talk about Dan Fallows, who on his Substack has talked no wax lyrical about skullduggery in F1 and why you can't separate the two entities from one another. No, Formula One exists only in the same space as skullduggery, god tier levels of. So too, we'll talk about Rebecca Clancy. She said something about Red Bull post Christian Horner, that there's something about their working culture that's ever so slightly different. We'll talk about the odds going into the Brazilian Grand Prix. So too, we'll talk about Andrew Benson. All F1 journos, for the avoidance of doubt, are created equally, but some are created more equal than others. Andrew Benson of the BBC has been talking about Red Bull and their circumstance. So too, we talked about Lewis Hamilton, comparing him to Maximilian Verstappen over the past couple of years. So too, we'll talk about Bernie Eccleston chiming in on Lando Norris favouritism over at the boys and girls at the papaya coloured team with their papaya coloured rules, and Ralf Schumacher has chimed in saying that he's got a reliable source that tells him something that's really important about whether Zach Brown wants Lando Norris or Norris, aka Dustin from Stranger Things, to win himself a championship of the drivers' variety. Buckle up, chap. It's going to get techier than techie things. In the first instance, I need to show you guys this. There was a lot of chat about Max Verstappen's performance, about his final stint, 37 laps on red-labelled soft compound tyres last race. I didn't cotton onto it. I did Max Verstappen a disrespect. I didn't understand, per all the other F1 aficionados, exactly how good that second stint, how good Max Verstappen was over the course of the Mexican Grand Prix race weekend. And then I saw a couple of clips, a couple of onboards of Max Verstappen doing the Colin McRae WRC settings, making sure that he doesn't yeet it into the barriers. That was proper. That was good. Maybe you might want to argue that he should have been there in the first place, but SH1T happens sometimes in F1, particularly into turn one on lap one. However, then I see this and I'm like, okay, all heads must bow, all tongues must confess. This, ladies and gentlemen, was truly greatness. Roll the clip. I mean, how? And I'm going to let it roll in the background. What is going on here, chat? That is chaos. You need to have cojones, humongous ones, to do that there. That is chaos. Listen, that is F1. And again, if you're dining most frequently at the restaurant of sporting endeavour par excellence, then how can you not rate that and put some respect on Mr. Maximilian Verstappen's name? It is, of course, race weekend, Brazil. And Max, by the way, doesn't go too poorly around here sometimes. Lest we forget 2024, as near as makes no difference, coming through the field from 17th or whatever. Similar story in 2016, especially if it's wet circumstance. Before we get to the poster and talk about Bartoletto and Lewis Hamilton, let's talk about the weather. This is changing by the second. The weather forecast is an Overton window, ergo it is fleeting. Therefore, as at the time of writing though, per F1 at F1 Big Data, FP1 15% chance of rain, sprint quali 45% chance of sprint race 75% chance of rain, quali 45, race 20%. I'm telling you, if it rains at this Grand Prix with 4 of them to go before we find out all of the driver championship answers to all of the driver championship questions this race weekend, I think we may be in for a treat. Your odds? Lando Norris. And again, it's important that we translate these. If you run yourself, these are Grand Prix odds. If you run yourself a simulation of the Grand Prix under these current circumstances, those odds translate to the following: that Lando Norris wins himself the race, the Grand Prix at Brazil, 4 to go, 38% of the time. That Maximilian Verstappen is your red hot favourite, 42% of the time. Of course, who else would you have as the favourite? Therefore, Oscar Piastri 20% of the time. George Russell, under these current circumstances, 6% of the time. And again, the broader context is this as far as the championship. Lando Norris still red hot favourite, an odds on favourite. Under the current circumstances, run 100 simulations of the next 4 races and bookmakers think that Lando Norris wins 57.8% of the time, OJP 30.7% of the time, Maximilian Verstappen 22.22 recurring percent. That's chaos. Listen, I don't know, chat. I'm going to be honest. I'm not sure whether that's true. I think that the odds makers, when all is told, might want to put some more respect, might regret not putting some more respect on Mr. Maximilian Verstappen's name. Let me share this with you because this is important. There's a brilliant article written over at Motorsport Italy, and they're talking about McLaren and their evolution, because lest we forget, not too long ago that car was an absolute dog, struggled last is where they were, and then all of a sudden they signed Rob Marshall, and Adrian Newey left Red Bull, and then McLaren bought a gazillion upgrades to Miami, and then they have the quickest car. What? This is chaos. Chat, this doesn't even make sense, does it? Go on. In this article, they say the following: that Andrea Stella's been talking about the cooling system and how important it is as far as their durable competitive advantage. He says, quote, the entire cooling system has been revised. Nothing has remained unchanged compared with 2024's car. The layout has been made much more efficient, allowing us to race with more aerodynamically closed configurations, even in extreme conditions. There's a significant gain in milliseconds at the same time, at the same temperature. They're being more efficient with their car, aren't they? It's not just the bloody double brake duct. It's everything. Everything in that car is optimized, not just for aerodynamic efficiency, but for cooling efficiency. Indeed, Adrian Newey, the last airbender, might argue that those two things are not mutually exclusive. Heat management, continues this article, isn't limited to cooling the power units, but also extends to the ability to prevent overheating of the rear tyres. For example, thanks to carbon fibre baskets in the corners designed to create a cool air gap that prevents heat from being transmitted from the brakes to the tyres. A glance at the complex design of the corners shows how much they are invested in this. Those double brake duct. I know Red Bull and others have brought something similar, but who does it better than McLaren, if we're honest? And again, we have this conversation under the aegis of the next 4 Grand Prix, all of which will be conducted in warmer climes. Please see as example Exhibit A, Brazil. Shortly thereafter it will be Vegas. Shortly thereafter Qatar and Abu Dhabi. Warm temperature each and every single one. Or maybe not Las Vegas. Marshall's team, continues this article, rather than stuffing a lot of ballast weight into the front of the wing, into the front wing and nose, chose to distribute the weight across several design choices. Contrary to popular belief, McLaren may have increased that radiator mass, improving heat exchange in the side pods and underneath the hood to ensure minimal bodywork openings, thus limiting efficiency losses and benefiting aerodynamics. This is a god tier car. Rob Marshall's truly gone to work, eh? And I can't help but respect it. This article continues, bookending the soliloquy thus: Marshall's team, rather than stuffing a lot of weight into the front wing and nose, chose to distribute the weight across several different choices. Contrary to popular belief, McLaren have increased the radiator mass. We just read that out. Your boy is being stupid. It's techie over here. And again, I read that thinking about whether Red Bull can close that gap. I'm not sure that they can. I'm not sure that they have. The exam question here, if we're considering the Drivers' Championship going forward, is whether Maximilian Verstappen can be the difference maker. That's the big question. And he has been right season to date. Mention no names, Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. So too, qualifying at the British Grand Prix. He's not been bad. That Max guy, to use Zach Brown's words, has not been too bad. What's going on, F-boy? Dynamite, you're a legend. Why are you finding it so difficult to call it out? Be brutally honest when it comes to the crash Verstappen. Bloody Nora, Danny. Listen, what one instance this year, Danny, Barcelona, which may ultimately cost Max Verstappen when all is said and done. But which other instances are we talking about? Yesterday's news, Danny, is not today's news. That's important. When you're talking about 2016, 2025, chap, catch up, do you know what I mean? Bring yourself into the 21st century, young sir. Interlagos won't be hot either. Yeah, it won't be, no, true, fair play, don't. It won't be hot, but it will be humid and it potentially will be rainy. Doesn't matter, you know what I mean? It's going to be a rain-strewn track, soaking wet. What's going on, Kinnar? I hope you're good. When does the hype button appear so we can boost the shit? It's soon after I press end. I would love to know how McLaren get their tyres. I know, me too, Space. I want to know how they keep their tyres so good, because that could prove critical over the course of the next couple races. Could it not? Oh, and by the way, I need to talk about Dan Fallows. There's been a lot made over the past couple of Grand Prix around Lando Norris's tape. Some say why Ronald Vording said of this circumstance. If Lando Norris is so good, why would he need himself some tape to dictate where he parts on the grid box? Why? Why is he a champion? Why is he competing in earnest for the Drivers' Championship and he needs himself tape? What's that all about? Lando will say, listen, I'm looking to use every advantage. There's no tax to be paid for using tape. And if that can make sure that I don't receive myself a 5-second penalty during the race, then that's what I'm going to do, because that's what champions do. Ronald Vording. And again, you have this conversation under the aegis of Lando and whether he does see himself as a champion. Is he deserving even, or is this Lando Norris privilege that he's benefiting from over at McLaren? Techie chat, than techie things. Dan Fallows has talked about this in his latest Substack, and I will link it in the description. Broadly, he's speaking to the fact that F1 is an F1 without skullduggery, that in his time over at Red Bull, that all they did was skullduggerous, that they love to delve into the dark arts that so make F1 F1. He says there was a time at Singapore when they were retarmacking the pit lane, and he said one of his engineering mates paid the people retarmacking to put extra tarmac on their pit lane. And I don't know whether he's talking about Aston Martin here, their portion of the pit lane, excuse me. I don't know whether he's talking about Aston Martin here or whether he's talking about Red Bull. But this is, to use Damon Hill's term, the dastardly sport, right? If you're not rubbing, rhetorically speaking, then you are not racing. He talks in his Substack about hiding bits and bobs that were left out just to make the other team's life inconvenient. He says he don't want to cheat. He doesn't want to bend nor break the rules, but he understands in skullduggery, in the dark arts, there is lap time and so durable competitive advantage. He talks about Michael Schumacher back in the day endearing himself to young drivers so that when he came upon their gearbox as he was about to lap them, they would adhere to the blue flags more stringently when they saw him in their wing mirrors than, I don't know, anybody else. A Rubens Barrichello, his teammate, a Mika Hakkinen, let's say. And again, he talks about drivers flirting with other rivals' girlfriends just to get in their head, working with another driver who did all that he could to just defeat other drivers, his rivals, not least of whom his team, the other guy in the same car on the opposite side of the grid, doing everything to defeat them mentally before they even got in the car. Listen, Jack, I don't hate this from Dan Fellows. It's God tier insight. I think sometimes in 2025 we can be F1 snowflakery, right? Sometimes you got to roll up your sleeve and be prepared to pay the tax, the not insubstantial tax requisite to win races and therefore championship. Does that necessitate sometimes a cheeky line step? You bet your bottom dollar it does. Christian Horner said famously on Drive to Survive, if you really want something, then you will do anything to get it. Surely that should be the tagline, the mantra, the Magna Carta, the modus operandi, if you were to crystallize it, of all things F1. Surely. Never have I heard it better said than that. It's techie. Fangio was he was indeed kidnapped, was Fangio. No one likes Lando, is why Tapegate exists. If Max Verstappen is using tape, then all other drivers would start using it. Go on then, SDW. I think Max would never use the tape. I think he would look down upon it as a racing driver, as a grizzled F1 vet. I don't think Max is going to do it. If there were advantage because Max didn't know how to park himself in the pits, in the grid box, excuse me, then probably would do it. But I mean, Max can park a car, and herein lies the problem, right? The differential. Lando is not the guy to use reverse psychology. Trust me, if he's using tape, then he needs it. I don't disagree, Dave. According to Peter, friend of the channel, Lando was being spoon-fed race instructions. He was. You heard it at TWM. If you listen to the way that his engineer, the one they call Will Joseph, I mean, they are spoon-fed it. Oh, and by the way, this is important, TWM. You've reminded me. There's a brilliant article talking about some of the changes that Lando has made to put himself currently, as at the time of writing, 1 point clear in the driver's standings. Here's the important one though. In and amongst shedding himself and shackling himself from the chains of social media, not being at the behest of what people think, trying to be less sensitive, focusing on the here and now, and on incremental gains, being in the process more than the outcomes. In and amongst those, and again, look at how that's yielded good starts at the Mexican Grand Prix, 800 meters down to turn on. That's not bad from Lando Norris, the man who gave up more places than any other driver on the grid in 2024 off the start. 28, not good enough, not necessarily championship material. However, this year, Lando's saying that he's changed. Notwithstanding some of his comments in British Vogue, my top priority is never going to be the championship. That's my second. What I want to do, Lando says, is be a good person, live a good life, have lots of fun, which is interesting. That'll never sit well with grizzled, old F1 vets, grey-bearded ones, because it's like, what are you talking about, mate? If winning the championship's not your priority and you're a racing driver, then you are no longer a racing driver, as Ayrton Senna would say. However, Lando Norris has spoken about a critical change, an additional one, a nuanced one that he's made as far as his steering wheel during qualifying. Now, we talk not, of course, about the feedback through the steering wheel that he so demanded of McLaren and Rob Marshall, Stella and Zach Brown to get the best out of himself and the car. Of course, we don't talk about the understeer that he had McLaren dial out of the MCL39. This time, we talk about the data on the steering wheel. Now, you see that Max Verstappen utilises to good effect the delta that you see on the steering wheel. A couple of races ago when George out-qualified him, impinged on when Lando, impinged upon his progress. Then Maximilian Verstappen would look on the delta going into the final corners and realise that he had to do something. He had to be last of the late breakers, just like he was a couple of years back going into Rascasse when Fernando Alonso had the gap on him, a delta to the tune of 0.2. Max Verstappen, again, it's not the strongest of the species that survives, but the most adaptable to change. And Max going into the dying embers, the last couple of corners, he will be critically, acutely aware of where he is, the delta to the pole, and he will act accordingly. Lando in stark contrast, however, to his old mate Max Verstappen, for some say soon to be 5-time champion. Lando says, I don't want to know. And I get it. Lando Norris has dialed out, therefore, the delta information on the steering wheel, so we can't even see it, with a view to get involved only in the processes. If you've ever driven a time trial, if you've ever driven, I don't know, an international A license test on Gran Turismo back in the day, I understand why Lando does that. Because when you have a favourable delta, when there is a negative before the integer on your steering wheel, there is a pressure that comes with, because you know that you're on a good lap. When you get through to the final turns, the final couple of or even the final sector, the pressure does one of these when you see that there's a negative delta, a purple number on your screen or your steering wheel. Lando says, you know what, mate, I don't need that. I don't need it. All that does is add more pressure to me. I want to be involved in the process and the process only. You would have heard his race engineer telling him about focus on the process, mate. This is what you can control. Sack off everything outside of that. And I don't hate it. I suppose the question is, why should Lando need that advice in the moment? A cheeky reminder, okay, but incessantly. Plus, you've got the bloody, get on the brakes a bit earlier, this kind. It's like, hang on. Is this dude really a champion? But again, maybe, I don't know, you can't be too proud to beg, right? Particularly if we're having the conversation under the umbrella heading of advantage, of the doable competitive variety. I have to say, we'd love to see Max catch up and take the championship lead. But if not possible, then please let it be Lando, not Piastri. Oh, the humanity, Geo Scholar. You guys let me know in the chat. If it's not Max, would you want Oscar or Lando? I don't know. I'm rooting for... I want Lando to do well, but I'd prefer Oscar Piastri to win it, if I'm being honest. How Oscar's been. Have you seen some of them Oscar Piastri overtakes that he was doing earlier on in the season when he had the car underneath him and when he was in Orabuena? Have you seen Oscar Piastri when he's at his Weetabix? The type of driver that dude is, that the overtakes back on Charles Leclerc at Baku last year. Lando Norris, chicane number 2. The one round Lewis Hamilton, Sir Lewis Carl Davidson Hamilton, round the outside to trailer park. Like, I don't know, Dynamite, I think I'm with you, chap. Third season in F1. Third only. Ain't this Lando's 8th? I mean, praying for rain in Brazil, Nando. I mean, maybe we get it, mate. Maybe we don't. Maybe the racing gods. I said earlier in the season, didn't I, that so incessantly was Zach Brown and Andrea Stella putting their thumb on the scales of competitiveness in F1, that at some point the racing gods were going to turn their back on McLaren, that the fortuitous circumstances were going to run out, that well was going to run dry. And I feel like we might be there still with McLaren. I feel like they've got bad luck to come. I don't know whether, I don't want to encourage nor root for them colliding into each other, but I don't know. I think Max Verstappen is going to take points out of that. How many points, though, is the question. Can the likes of George Russell get involved? Because, again, he's not the first time that wasn't his first race win around there a couple of years ago, 2022? It's techie, this. Maybe George can get involved. But I think Max will need other drivers to start eating into the points in real time, the points hauls of the McLaren boys, if indeed he's to stand a chance of winning himself, not his 4th, but his 5th consecutive championship. Oh, and by the way, speaking of Red Bull, there's been a lot of talk about their performance in a post-Christian Horner era. A couple of different things, and it isn't. I've got to bring myself to the truth pulpit. I have to, because I loved me some Christian Horner. He was a get-it-done type MFer, and for that, if there were a team principal on the grid that I'd have to take into the trenches with me, he has a name, and his name would be Christian Horner. When you mean Toto, the boy who cried, well, I don't trust Toto at all, not as far as I can throw him, especially on the back of his dealings, his contractual negotiations with King George Russell. Look at, no thanks, no, give me Christian Horner each and every, and that will come with difficulty and ramification. I get it. He's not a choir boy. I understand who Christian Horner is and what I'm dealing with, but the better the devil that you know. Some would say I'd pick Christian Horner every single time, but look what's happened since. Now there's 2 schools of thought. This is legacy Horner, this uptick in Red Bull performance. Some are saying that this is just legacy Horner, that this was always going to happen whether Horner was in power or was not in power. On the other side of the fence, you have those that are saying that Lauren Mekies is operating in the team principle, the engineer come team principle era. Remember we spoke about Bonotto previously, and some said that he didn't have the leadership qualities. Everything was up here, but fundamentally he was an engineer, but not good enough a leader to bring Scuderia Ferrari back to the mountaintop, kicking and screaming. It feels like Mekies has done something different though, that he's trusted, invested more in Max Verstappen's feedback, which is interesting. That in the Christian Horner era, the apex predator, their North Star was always what the simulator said. Now it sounds like Lauren Mekies is trusting the word of Max Verstappen. You remember at Monza, Matt said, you know what, take some of these downforce points off of my rear wing and I'll crack on, lads. Trust me, I can do it. Trust me at the British Grand Prix. I can, whatever. Just take some. I'll leave it to me. And it sounds like Laura Meckes is trusting Max Verstappen's word just a bit more than Christian Horner did, which is interesting because I thought Max Verstappen had the ear of Christian Horner. That's what I thought from a distance, but apparently not as much as Lauren Meckes. Techie, I don't know what to say. Listen, Lauren Meckes has done something, and Rebecca Clancy speaks to this at the BBC on the Checkered Flag podcast. She says that I think Red Bull have been really impressive in a post-Christian Horner era, particularly since Meckes has come in. He wasn't expecting it. It was a surprise that Horner was let go after the British Grand Prix in July. He took the summer break. I think that probably came at the perfect time for Red Bull as well. Techie. Very, very... Did sacking Christian Horner come at the perfect time? I think this is a Monday morning quarterback privilege. I think if had this gone the other way, had Red Bull's performances fallen off the cliff, like so many predicted, myself included, then I don't think we'd be saying that the timing was perfect. Hindsight is always 2020, is it not? Rebecca Clancy continues. For Verstappen and for the team, they've gone, actually, yeah, have a bit of fun. Pressure, therefore, is off. Quote, you hear other stories coming out from the factory that the culture is changing a bit. The development, how they approach races in changing to their advantage. They do seem to be in quite a good place at the moment. Oh, the humanity. Save me the Christian Horner blasphemy. Okay, so there is Monday morning quarterback privilege in here. Everybody can be wise after the event. However, they have changed. They've done something differently, haven't they? Max Verstappen, people, mention no names, Break F1, former Max Verstappen performance engineer, will always say of Max that part of one of his many gifts is his ability to just go. Gets to the track FP1 and he's on the money, 10/10. Most of the other drivers on the grid will take a while to play their way into the crease. Mention no names, Oscar Piastri, you see every single race, right? FP1, he's like 2 to 3 tenths adrift of Lando Norris, and then gradually over the course of the race weekend, he bridges the gap, and that delta comes down and is 9 times out of 10 as Nero's makes no difference. Stasis by Q3. Max Verstappen tends to go straight on the money, full send 10/10 in lap 1 of FP1. Now, chat coming out of Red Bull used to say that they were too busy tinkering, under Christian Horner at least, they spent too long tinkering around with setups. That's why at Spa-Francorchamps a couple of years back, you see Max Verstappen and Checo Perez having to lift and coast going through the compression of Eau Rouge because they fudged the setup then. Now, however, Lauren Meckes is like, what are we dilly-dallying around for? Let's get on it from lap 1 of session 1, aligning himself with the approach of Maximilian Verstappen. Now, as far as the culture, listen, for a while people said that we weren't looking at Oracle Red Bull racing. We were looking at Christian Horner racing. Lest we forget that Christian wanted to spin off Red Bull technology, Red Bull F1 underneath him. He desperately harboured aspirations to own Red Bull. He wanted to become not necessarily a team principal, CEO also, that was in his title, but a bloody owner. That's why you hear Christian Horner's not coming back until he can get himself a seat at the equity table. Because again, had he had equity at Oracle Red Bull Racing, then it would have got techie. They would have been able to sack him. Therefore, the irony in this is that you remember the exchange between Christian and Toto, the boy who cried wolf. Christian's jibe at Toto would always be, well, Toto's not a racing man. He's a businessman. He bought himself, in fact, he inherited himself Mercedes. Toto's retort would always be one of these. I didn't inherit Mercedes, Christian. I bought it. 55 million at the time, which has since turned into bloody 33% of like 4 billion potentially. Talk about capital appreciation. And that's what Christian Horner wants and wanted. And then Mintzlaff and the Austrians were like, I don't know about all that, mate. Dietrich Mateschitz, when he was alive, might not have wanted this. He desperately wanted Porsche, a collaboration between Porsche, and Red Bull Racing. Christian Horner took it right, didn't he? Or left even and went for Ford. One of these, it was politics and wrestling and power dynamics. And that's why potentially, per Clancy, the working culture over at no longer Christian Horner Red Bull Racing, but Oracle Red Bull Racing has changed for the better, some say. That being said, there will be your Christian Horner diehards, your Christian Horner loyalists, who will yet and still have in their contract clauses that mean as soon as Christian Horner's no longer there, that they can leave. They will be hanging around in real time to see Christian Horner's next move so that they can reunite with him then. And that will get techie again as far as Red Bull and their dearth, a deluge potentially as far as their intellectual property and talent. It will get. I'm so keen to see what happens with Red Bull Racing. Cameron and I say the same exact thing, said T-Razor. Max and Jos, so true. But regardless, we need Horner in an F1 team for Joe. I don't disagree with that, Dynamite. I do miss myself a bit of Christian Horner and the back and forth. I tell you what, in particular, where the Christian Horner absence is loudest, the press conferences, chat. Telling you, when they all go to when the team principals, oh yeah, kumbaya, united colours of Benetton. We're all such good friends. Can't you see that we go to dinner after the race and before, and we all break? But no, sat that off. Nobody cares about that. I'm not that's not F1. That isn't F1. Nobody wants to see this. I don't want to see Frederick Vasseur and Toto Wolff spooning it. I don't care. Stop it. Leave it alone. I want to see what Christian Horner brought to the fray, which was, of course, beef and rancor and fissure. This is F1 chat. And the banter of Christian Horner, I can't lie, is greatly missed. It's loud in its absence, conspicuous even. Horner makes F1 hilarious, 100%. Can you imagine this year's Drive to Survive? Oh, Son's Christian Horner. No, it's not even. Is it even Drive to Survive? And or F1 without Horner's presence? It's techie, Dynamite. I can't even talk to that circumstance. How do you know? Coercive behaviour. How can you verify that it was not? Horner is go. He wasn't a bad team principal. Horner makes F1 hilarious. He really does. Go on then. Let me tell you about this as well, because it's going to get techier than techie things. I need to tell you about Zach Brown et al. In the first instance, before we get to Zach as we round third, let me tell you about Andrew Benson, because he writes a Q&A article and he talked about a gazillion different things. In the first instance, there's a comparison about the one that they call Sir Lewis, Carl Davidson, Hamilton. He's talking about how Lewis compared to his teammates. Now, Lewis is 64 points behind Charles Leclerc as at the time of writing. I kept saying 50 because I presumed it was 50. It was 50 pre the Mexican Grand Prix, as at the time of writing, 64 points. There are only 4 races remaining. That pains me to say that. I'm not going to tell you any lines. Seven-time champion, GOAT settings, first round Hall of Fame, 64 points behind Charles Leclerc. Now, in Andrew Benson's latest article, his Q&A, he's spoken to this. He says, well, 9 times out of 10, Sir Lewis Hamilton has beaten all of his teammates. He beat Button. I think he lost one season to Button in 2011 when he wasn't feeling very well, when all of the Nicole Scherzinger whirlwind was going on around him. Rest of them, Kovalainen and Bottas, roundly nailed them. Now, George Russell, 2-1. I think he lost in terms of seasons. But then he goes on. I'm going to tell you, this is important because he starts referring to Maximilian Verstappen. So the question is, Max Verstappen hasn't had a teammate for ages. And Andrew Benson's like, well, yeah, granted, I'll take that. Question something like, well, what would Max look like against a Charles Leclerc or a George Russell? Mention no names in 2027 alongside Mercedes. Here's what Benson has to say to that. And the final stanza, is the most important one here. He said it can also be argued that on balance, Lewis Hamilton has had a higher caliber of teammate for more of his career than Max Verstappen. What Verstappen has not had alongside him since 2018 is a driver who is both experienced, and a recognised top liner. True, fair play. Fair play, but does that dim Max Verstappen's light? You can have that argument amongst yourselves. It would be fascinating, continues Andrew Benson, quote, to see Max alongside Charles Leclerc, Russell, or one of the McLaren drivers, for example. However, having said that, continues Benson, and again, all F1 journos are created equal, but some are created more equal than others. Andrew Benson bookends his soliloquy thus: having said all of that, quote, right now pretty much everyone in Formula One accepts that Max Verstappen is the standout driver on the grid. He's right up there in the debate about who is the greatest of all time. Welcome, Andrew Benson. We've been expecting you for some time, sir. They're like, get your feet up, do you know what I mean? Grab yourself a beverage. This is the house that only respects sporting endeavour par excellence. Welcome, Mr. Benson. We've been expecting you for some time. Oh, and by the way, Andrew Benson talks about Tsunoda-san. I don't think he wants to break the news officially that Tsunoda-san won't be at Red Bull Racing this time next year, but he does drop a hint. When he's speculating, he says that Tsunoda-san's never really been rated by Red Bull Racing. How do we know? Well, when he was testing at the back end of last year with a view to see whether he was ready for the big seat alongside Max Verstappen, all the relevant stakeholders, all the C-suite exec level bods, the key decision makers, they all sacked off. They all went home after Abu Dhabi last year, didn't they? Horner didn't hang around. None of them did. Bloody Enrico Balbo and Pierre Vacher didn't hang around to see the god tier levels of Yuki Tsunoda feedback in testing. They didn't care. They went straight home right away. First flight available. The only one that hung around was Dr. Helmut Marko to see Yuki Tsunoda's god tier level of feedback. All the others went away. That tells you all you need to know about how they see Yuki Tsunoda. And check this out as well as first-hand anecdotal evidence. Goodwood Festival of Speed, when they were celebrating 20 years last year, the Red Bull family were all there in force. It was Danny Rick, it was Max, all of them were there, Lawson and Checo, all of them were there. Tsunoda-san was there too, but where was he when they were on the balcony with Lord March? Tsunoda-san was nowhere to be seen. They don't respect that dude. Tsunoda-san is Honda's guy, is now, always has been. They're paying $20 million for the privilege of having him a seat at the big table alongside Max Verstappen. That is the truth. It was 10 million before when he was at the Racing Bulls. Double that, mate, if you want the big seat. And again, Honda always wants a Japanese driver in a Japanese car, right? That's always been the way. So patriotic are they and their automotive industry. As of next year, you know already, Honda won't be working in collaboration with Red Bull. Ford will. So therefore, there will be no space, no room at the Red Bull Inn for the one they call Tsunoda-san. The question is, what happens at Aston Martin? Because Aston Martin will have their engines manufactured by Honda as at 2026. Is there room over there for Tsunoda-san? Not when you realise that Stroll has a rolling contract in perpetuity, because Papa Stroll, his daddy, owns the business, and Fernando Alonso is contracted at the very least at the very latest, or least even, through to 2026. So what are we going to do there? Where are you going to fit Tsunoda-san? As the reserve driver? Well, not anymore, because they've just signed Crawford. So where does Tsunoda-san go? Well, we spoke about it already. Potentially IndyCar, says the legend. That is Joe Sayward. Potentially. But again, that's probably the most likely outcome. This isn't me saying that's going to happen for sure. But is that... I'm pausing, because I don't want you guys to take this to the bank. This is, of course, conjecture and speculation, but I don't think he'll be in F1 next year. Suffice to say, Super Formula maybe, I don't know. But again, the chatter is that he'll potentially find himself a DCR team in IndyCar next year. And Andrew Benson concurs. He says that they never really rated him. Never rated. Tsunoda-san's just that he's a pay driver. And again, here's what Andrew Benson said. The expectation for Red Bull next year is that Isaac Hadjar will be promoted to the second seat at Red Bull Racing alongside Max Verstappen after an impressive rookie season at Racing Bulls. It would be easy, therefore, to make the argument that this might be another case of driver blah 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 being promoted ahead of time. It says, given Tsunoda-san has been in F1 since 2021 and Red Bull are obviously not especially convinced about his potential, you could see them dropping him to keep Liam Lawson alongside Lindblad next year at Racing Bulls. There you go. Now that Andrew Benson's saying that, Joe Sayward is saying that, you guys can connect to yourself some F1 causation dots. Next year, take this to the bank. In the head seat alongside Max Verstappen, it will be Isaac Hadjar. In the Racing Bulls seats, it will be Arvid Lindblad and it will be Liam Lawson. In the reserve car, it will be Alex Dunn. They'll sit on Alex Dunn and see how he gets on in F2 next year, with a view potentially to promote him to a F1 car proper, a seat, if, of course, Liam Lawson doesn't do what he thinks he can do. It's going to get techie for Red Bull over there. And then what happens if Max Verstappen goes? That all goes to pot. If they don't build themselves a car, you don't think Max Verstappen's going to go to somebody who will mention no names, Mercedes, at the altar of their god tier power unit in 2026? I'm telling you, it's going to get techie. Who have I got for pole? Nick Marker. It's Brazil. Therefore, the mantra of never betting against Max Verstappen is stronger than ever. Brazil. Fair point. Who can I argue against number one? And regardless of the process, the point should not be Yuki. It should be let Hadjar develop at the junior team. But then who, Michael, do you promote alongside? Like, who goes there? If it's not Isaac Hadjar, what do you do? What, leave Yuki now? I don't think so. A Red Bull team that promotes junior hot prospect talent? No. Mike, you're a legend, chap. I appreciate you. Ad infinitum, caress that like button. You're a legend, chap. And I'm going to do something over here that's really, really important. Oh, and by the way, we need to talk about Zach Brown and Ralf Schumacher and Lando Norris and OJP and the subject of favourite. This has been the topic on everybody's lips, right? Are McLaren favouring Lando Norris? Talked about this ad nauseum, right? Here's my take on it. I think you can say definitively that there is men's Raya here, that Zach Brown has motivation, being that Lando Norris is the prodigal son. As far as tenure, he's been there 7-8 years now. Oscar Piastri's only been there 3. By dint of that, of course, if Zach Brown had himself a magic lamp and a genie and could pick which one of his drivers, so long as one of them wins it, could pick which one of them were to win the drivers, of course he'd pick Lando. I mean, they have an affiliation. He was a director at the bloody firm Quadrant, was he not? At least on paper, per Company's House. Lest we do the Abbott of Unreason thing, as so many F1 Twitter muggles have tried. The documents are the documents. Zach Brown's name was on it as far as Quadrant directors, irrespective of what his role was substantively. Nonsense. Caught their friends. Good friends. You can see the twinkle in Zach Brown's eye when Lando is on the podium. You can see it. There's no arguing against that. It is there right in front of your face, unless you want to do the Abbott of Unreason thing and tell me that up is down. Now, does this mean necessarily that Zach Brown is affecting that change? He's doing his best to unscrew the nuts and the bolts on Oscar Piastri's car, like so many Lewis Hamilton fans, myself included, said about Mercedes in 2016. I don't think so. That's actus reus, and I don't think it's Sagan standard dictates that extraordinary claims will require, by definition, extraordinary evidence to substantiate them. And I'm not sure I've ever seen evidence. Now, we can go back and forth and talk about the Italian Grand Prix, but for the Italian Grand Prix, you've got Hungary last year as the equal and the opposite. There's a couple of other times. You could talk about Oscar Piastri being asked at the Italian Grand Prix qualifying to give Lando Norris a tow to ensure that he gets through from Q2 into Q3, having made an error of the unforced variety. That Monza qualifying I do not like, because if I'm Oscar Piastri in the 81 car and you want me to tow on the back of a cheeky Lando Norris mistake, one of many this season I have, you want me to tow him into Q3 as my principal rival, the other protagonist in the championship for the drop? No, I'm not doing it. No, you can, no, you're having a laugh, mate. Don't even ask me to suspend my disbelief. I wouldn't have done it if I. Can you imagine? Let me put this into context. Can you imagine Ron Dennis coming over and to Ayrton Senna and saying, "Well, Ayrton, could you Alan's struggling in Q2 here to get through to Q3. He made a bit of a mistake going through turn 3. Alan, could you do a favour? And I know it's the two of you competing with each other in the championship, but do you mind giving Ayrton a tow?" It's not going to happen. Alan was well intended. Alan was the one who encouraged Ron Dennis to bring Ayrton Senna as the next one, the next hot prospect, the next best one to McLaren in the first instance. Can you even have imagined Ron Dennis having the temerity to come over, and they favoured Ayrton Senna towards the end of their tenure, 1989 and 1990, of course. Like, what are you doing? Nonsense, no chance. So I don't know. I think I would have lost my SH1T were I Oscar. However, Bernie Eccleston concurs. Bernie Eccleston sees us this and raises us again. Here's what Bernie says. Bernie says, of course, McLaren would want Lando Norris to win. He's the bigger commercial entity. A rising Lando Norris tide floats all F1 commercial boats, not just McLaren's one. How do you know this? Well, every time there's a McLaren advert, whether it's Monster or Ralph Lauren or Hilton, it's Lando Norris front and centre. He's the guy that they want because he's got the look. He looks like a champion. The flowing hair. It's Lando on the cover of British Vogue, not Oscar Piastri, because he's got that bit. There is something about the chap, whatever that X factor is. He's good looking. He looks like Bond. Whatever it is, Lando Norris has it. He's a marketeer's dream, and that, ladies and gentlemen of the F1 jury, has to matter. And Bernie Eccleston concurs. Of course, you would want Lando to win a championship if you were Zach Brown, because again, for the avoidance of doubt, a rising Lando Norris tide floats all commercial F1 boats. Bernie Eccleston agrees, like, of course you want Lando to win. Ralf Schumacher, however, says in a conversation with Peter Hardenacke, says the following. Per reliable source, Ralf Schumacher says this favouritism lark. Nonsense. Zach Brown prefers Lando Norris. He says, I can only say one thing, quote, and I know this from a reliable source. Zach Brown, quote, prefers no one but his fastest driver. He doesn't care at all. The main thing is that he becomes world champion with the team and has a world champion driver in the team. Whatever his name is, Zach Brown is a businessman, and as nice as he is, he's tough as nails. He doesn't care which one of the two it is. Well, hang on, Ralph, you've contradicted yourself in that stanza, mate. Do you know what I mean? Some sort of contradiction of terms, per se. He's a businessman. So why wouldn't he therefore want Lando Norris? If Lando Norris is the bigger commercial entity of the two, why wouldn't Zach Brown, again with his commercial mind, as god tier as he has been, securing all the sponsors that so spurred on the financial resources over at McLaren and enabled their bottom line to ultimately trampoline them, catapult them to this level of success? When they were losing, you saw Zach Brown on Netflix managing the stakehold. Do you know what I mean? Managing in real time the expectations of the likes of Google Chrome, telling them one day we'll be at the front of the grid and you'll get all the airtime that your money and financial resources so deserve. That was Zach Brown then. And if that's Zach Brown then, what do you think he is now? Of course he will realise, he'll be acutely aware that, again, for the avoidance of doubt, a rising Lando Norris commercial tide floats all commercial F1 boats. McLaren's too, and that's why it gets techie than techie thing. Easy G, do you concur, sir? You think McLaren would sabotage Oscar's car while Max is closing in? No, I don't think that for a second, mate. Again, this is the difference between mens rea and actus reus. I think the desire might be there, but it would be very ballsy. Zach Brown would need cojones the size of the world to do something so shady. Let's not go there, because Oscar didn't experience any bad times in McLaren. True, not like Lando. And again, he's earned that, hasn't he? His loyalty when he could have signed for Red Bull last season. I mean, he deserves, maybe he deserves it. Easy G, you convince him, chat. There's nothing wrong with McLaren helping Lando and wanting him to be number one. Do you remember? Go on and chat. Do you remember this? I've forgotten Exhibit A. This is really important as far as Lando is concerned. Do you remember the suspension geometry? Do you remember earlier on in the season, Lando was struggling with the inherently understeery McLaren MCL39 handling dynamic? Couldn't extract the best out of himself by dint of extracting the best out of the car. That was Lando's problem, for which he and McLaren would need to solve. And then they did two things. That was the first complaint. The second complaint was that he wasn't getting the feedback through the steering wheel that his overlappy throttle and brake styles so require. And they did two things for Lando, didn't they? You'll recall, and again, when the book is written on McLaren's 2025 season, this will have to be chapter number 1. You'll recall they said they were going to do two things. In the first instance, they were going to amend for Lando's suspension with a view to dial out and or minimise for some of that understeery handling dynamic. In the second instance, they said they were going to give him the feedback necessary that he needed to extract the best out of the car and himself. Two things. And then they tinkered with the suspension geometry, didn't they, again, to dial out some of that understeer. And then all of a sudden, Lando Norris seems like a god-tier driver, yet again is able to fulfill his not insubstantial potential, which feels right and wrong. It's chaos, isn't it? Especially when you realise that Lando Norris declined to have the suspension geometry and the new suspension. He said that it wasn't an upgrade, not in terms of absolute terms performance. So why would I need it then? I can drive the car as it is, all of these bits and bobs I can drive around. And then we get to the last couple of Grand Prix. The Mexican Grand Prix is a case in point. Lower grip, and then all of a sudden Oscar Piastri normally does one of these and bridges the gap over the course of FP1 through Q3 as far as the lap time delta that Lando Norris, if past his prologue, has over him. That doesn't happen, because Lando Norris now, with his overlappy style on a low grip track, is all of a sudden driving and thriving. It's techier than techie things, this. Oscar Piastri isn't gapping Lando again because the circumstance doesn't suit his more linear inputs as far as the accelerator and brake. He's on one 100%, and then he's off it, and then he's on the other one. Lando Norris is doing something weird. Sometimes he's a little bit on the throttle. He's feathering the throttle whilst on the brake and manipulating the steering wheel on combined entry, and that's where it gets techier than techie things. I'm keen to see. I don't know. I don't know whether Ralf Schumacher's right here. I don't know whether Bernie is right. Listen, if you to save a dying puppy, I don't think Zach Brown's doing anything, but I think he definitely wants. You can just see it. Colour me naive. Nobody's going to tell me anything different. I can see it in Zach Brown that this dude wants Lando Norris to win. Does that mean that he's out there doing anything to effect for that? I'm not so sure. That again, Sagan standard. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and I have none, so I'll stand down. Jack hit the nail on the head and everybody's angry. I don't know what Jack said. Bad. He had more wins in the first half of the season than Lando. No, he was brilliant in the first half of the season. Dynamite is the truth. It is the truth. I forgot which race. Red flag. When was the suspension change? Earlier on in the season. It will get techier than techie things. Listen, we'll be back same time, same place tomorrow. You guys have been legends. I appreciate each and every single one of you. To the moon. Back between now and tomorrow morning. Next time, prosecution rests. No further questions, Your Honour.